All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Nyer, and I'm with the Virginia Small Business Development Center Network. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia SBDC is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 27 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local community. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's bootcamp, Mobile Apps, How to Plan, Execute, and Launch, is one of our educational offerings. We are recording today's presentation. It'll be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted. And if you have any questions during the presentation, we ask you to type those into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We've also enabled the live transcript function, which you can hide or show via your meeting controls. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's session. Cameron Nelson is the Chief Digital Advisor for the Virginia SBDC and the Central Virginia SBDC. Mr. Nelson has over 18 years of experience in technology, and as a senior tech consultant in Silicon Valley, helped Fortune 500 companies improve their digital marketing and e-commerce. At the same time, he founded several tech companies, including an SAS website for tree preservation and blockchain platform for nonprofits. Cameron is accomplished in language, culture, and has an MBA and MA, and believes new technology products have the ability to help shape our world for the better. Please join me in welcoming our presenter for today, Cameron Nelson.
Thanks for the introduction, and hello everybody. Welcome to this boot camp on how to plan, execute, and launch an app for your business. Launching an app for a business is a pretty big endeavor, and I'm going to cover the main topics at a high level, some of the major considerations you'll need to think about, the costs and the strategy that go into creating a successful app, and also making sure that app is actually driving your business's success. And I'm available for one-on-one meetings after this presentation. If there's something that we don't get a chance to talk about, or you'd like to go into more detail about your business and your app idea, I'd be happy to have a one-on-one meeting with you. My email address is here on the screen. This presentation will also be emailed to you afterwards, so you'll have it there. And so I look forward to hearing from any of you who would like that one-on-one session after this meeting. So with that, let's jump right into it. The first thing I want to discuss is, should your small business develop a mobile app? Now, this is a question that you should ponder pretty deeply, because developing an app is a large expense and time commitment from you as a business owner. And keep in mind that the app market is very crowded. When you look at how many apps are on the different major platforms, there's 2.2 million apps on the Apple iTunes Store and 3.5 million apps on the Android and Google Store. So when you think about launching an app, you really need to be careful, because there are probably already apps out there that do something similar to what you're thinking about. So research is always good to do. And that's why it's essential to have the right strategy and a plan to start your app development and get it off on the right foot. So if you're thinking about developing an app, I think there's two questions that you should ask yourself first. First is, are you ready to invest a sizable amount of money in developing your mobile app? And second, are you ready to dedicate a large amount of time? There's no shortcut answer if you hire a developer that they'll be able to develop an app without your constant involvement. That just usually doesn't happen. So you'll need to plan on spending a lot of time working with them on both the large picture goals of the app, but also some minute details. So plan on it taking a lot of time. So if you're still pretty sure or curious about developing an app, let's talk about the advantages and also some of the cautions involved in that process. So what are the advantages of having a mobile app? Well, mobile apps are being used by billions of people worldwide, so it's a great way to tap into a huge market. And sometimes this market is not accessible via a web page, which you might already have for your business. And this is why a lot of businesses choose to also have a mobile app. And some businesses just have a mobile app and they don't really even have a traditional website. Secondly, an app provides an opportunity for engagement with new customers. So you're able to get quick feedback through apps, through chat features, or submitting questions or comments, and you can engage with customers and get feedback from your customers through the app. The app obviously will provide an opportunity for increased customers and therefore sales and revenue for your company. There are lots of different ways to create a mobile app. You're not stuck to one solution. You can develop for either operating system, iOS or Android, or both. There's different ways to go about developing and launching your app. And so this is an advantage because if you do know where your target market is, you're able to really customize your app to meet them where they are. And finally, running an app gives you greater profit potential versus some other business models that might have higher overhead. So consider if you're able to create an app instead of having to rent a store or physical space, this can be a big time saver and a cost saver through the life of your business and increase your potential profit. But creating an app is not without its challenges. So the first challenge that I run into a lot, and I've helped to create probably over 20 apps for small businesses, is that the complexity and the scope and the time commitment is often underestimated by somebody getting into an app development for the first time. Even if you hire a great app development person or a company, the time involved from you is going to be significant. So don't underestimate that. And also unexpected issues are going to probably crop up, just things you haven't anticipated. Maybe it's an account you have to set up, a two-factor authentication you have to get working. There might be bank account information and lots of details go into creating an app that you probably are not aware of. And so that's going to take more time than you anticipate. Another issue with an app is that, if you create an app that just has not come up with a new or innovative solution, it's probably not going to do very well in the marketplace. So this is where a lot of strategy and research comes into play before you launch an app. And I'm going to talk more about how to go about the research part in a moment. But you want to make sure your app is doing something new or innovative to give it the best chance of success. Another big risk is that if you start on the app development path, but you don't have enough funds to finish the development process. I've seen this happen time and time again, where the scope of the app has to increase because the original plan you had, you realize is not going to really be sufficient for your customers' needs. And that's why it's important to do enough research and talk to customers before you start development to make sure you have the right feature set listed, to have an accurate cost expectation of the project. But if you end up adding things over time, you're inevitably going to end up having to pay more for it. And it's always a bad scenario when you're 80% done, but you don't have enough to finish that last 20%. And finally, not choosing the right development team. There's a lot of selection and options when it comes to hiring the right developers. You might be looking for someone local in your city, in your state, or even offshore in cheaper markets where developers are less expensive, like India or Eastern Europe. I can talk through some of the pros and cons of these different selections, but it's very important that you do hire the right development team. So the next thing I want to talk about is what is this difference between iOS and Android, and what does it really mean for you if you're developing an app? Well, there's some different selection criteria that you just need to be aware of. The first one is, quality over quantity. Now, as we saw, the iOS store has fewer apps by about 30 or 40% than the Android store. So in general, people consider the Apple Store to have higher quality apps. But then again, the platform size. So as you look at the chart here, market share, Android has 87% market share globally versus just 13% for Apple. So if you're trying to reach the broadest market possible, most likely you're looking at the Android platform for that. The development process is another selection criteria. In general, the Apple coding language takes less time to develop, and therefore you're able to develop apps there usually less expensively. Android runs on a Java platform that generally takes more time to develop than iOS, and therefore sometimes can cost more. The approval process, and anytime you launch an app, just so you know, it does go through an approval process. It's not automatically put into the store. The approvals can take anywhere between a few days to a few weeks, and so you just need to be aware of that. The Android process is relatively short, usually just a couple of days, whereas the Apple process can take several weeks. The cost is going to be a little bit higher on Android, like we said, and a little bit less on Apple in general. Now, this can vary based on the app you're developing and the certain things you need it to do. For example, if you're trying to put in GPS tracking in your app, you might find that that actually is less expensive on Android than Apple for various reasons. So the app you're developing can change that, but in general, Android's cheaper. And because Android has a very large global market share, and if you were to look at just North American market share, it'd be much closer to 50-50. So globally, the Android users are a lower income group because a lot of them might be in India, China, Latin America, and Africa. So whether or not your target market resides in these groups, just keep in mind that if you're trying to monetize your app, whether you're selling a subscription package or other things you're doing, you're generally going to be able to charge more on the Apple Store. And the last point of differentiation here is, what does it cost to launch an app on these two different stores? Android is much cheaper. It's $25 to get a developer account, and that's lifetime. And Apple charges you about $100 per year. So those are the pros and the cons and the different considerations. If you have questions about which of these stores is best for you, then I'd be happy to try to tackle them at the Q&A or in a one-on-one meeting. But again, the difference really comes down to what your market is, what your product is. So now that we've looked at the major platforms and the main pros and cons, I want to talk about the 8 steps you need to follow to successfully develop your app. And the first one, like I said, is market research. You can't underestimate the importance of market research. You need to think about who your target market is very carefully before you make your app. And also, what is the problem that it's solving? Because a great app is only going to be as great as the problem that it solves. And the bigger the problem, the better that app. The second step is that you're going to have to scope your app. So this can be done by doing interviews or collecting surveys or data from your target market, asking them questions about what you think your app should do. And out of the data you get, you're going to create a list of features. Now, these are not the features you think the app should have. That's a big mistake people make, is they think, I need an app that can do A, B, C, and D. You need to actually select your feature list based on the feedback you get from your target market. At the end of the day, they're the ones deciding whether or not they're going to buy it or not. So this will help you identify critical features and also things that are not critical, but kind of nice to have. And this will help you define your minimum viable product, which is a quick entry into the app, developing the app without some of the features, but it's usually much cheaper and quicker to launch that type of app. Step 3 is defining a developer and defining your budget. So when you come to this step, there's lots of places you can go to look for developers. I can recommend developers who I've worked with a lot in the past with SBDC clients. You can look on places like Upwork.com to find freelancers, or simply Google app developer, and you'll find many, many firms that are trying to do it. Now, I always recommend you should get at least 2 to 3 price quotes. It'll give you a sense of which developers have the best kind of thought process for helping build your app. You should compare local versus offshore or international options and read lots of reviews of the developers and look at apps they've created in the past. Fourth, you need to really plan out your business plan for developing an app. Just like launching any kind of business, you're going to have expenses, you're going to have revenue. You need to decide how much you're going to invest in the app, when you're going to start making revenue and then profit from it. What is your return on investment for the app? Also, if you decide that some of the features from step number 2 are going to be held off for maybe 3 months or 6 months, kind of a phase 2 type of feature, you should plan on how much they're going to cost and build this into your financial model. Step 5 is you need to now know how you're going to market this app. Now, marketing an app can vary a lot. You might do it on social media, you might do it with paid ads, and it all comes down to identifying who your target customers are, building some what's called buyer personas, or essentially understanding their needs, their wants, where they're looking for information, and then you know where to go to market to them. Step 6 is building a prototype, also called an MVP, or minimum viable product. So in this step, you're going to build an app that has somewhere between 50 and 80% of the features that you think you need, but you're going to build the app in such a way that you can launch it in the store and start getting some feedback and hopefully some revenue from it. And while you take that feedback and revenue, then you plan to build out new features, kind of a phase 2 launch. The reason why most apps use an MVP kind of launch model is because it allows you to gather and incorporate user feedback and iterate on your app And this is proven to be much better than if you just spend all the money up front and build a giant app, which ends up having features that people don't want, or maybe that don't work right because it was all kind of rushed a little bit too much at the same time. Step number 7 is launching the app. There's several different ways that are generally the best. Beta test is the approach, and a closed beta test would be inviting a certain amount of people, usually friends, family, colleagues, or some people in your target market. And you're going to get direct feedback from them about the app before it's launched on the main app store. And an open beta test could just be allowing everybody to get access to it. The app stores both allow you to have a beta test phase in your app, where it's basically just tagged as this is a beta app, but anybody can use it and provide their feedback. You can monetize apps during a beta test phase, but so that's up to you and how you developed your financial model, whether you'd like to do that. And the final step is promoting the app. So after a beta test phase, which could last anywhere between a few weeks and a few months, you're probably going to have some funding and budget to promote the app. So whether or not this is going to be in boosted social media posts, paid ads on Facebook or Google, or maybe even hosting some sort of a launch event, these are all ways to promote your app. If you follow these 8 steps, it'll certainly help you increase the chances of success of your app. And I'm going to talk through more detail of these steps next, so you have a better understanding of what they all entail. So the first and really important step here is market research. This is one of the things that I like doing, and I've researched for dozens of apps and websites. And this process usually works something like this. It's very important to conduct interviews and speak to people in your target market to get their thoughts and impressions about the app you plan on creating. This is a good starting point because it costs you nothing, and the data you get back can be really invaluable. Step 2 is, with this data you've collected and the information you've gained, you want to narrow down your focus, and you want to really get specific on what your app needs to accomplish in order to solve the problem that you're proposing to solve. You don't want the focus of the app to be too broad, because generally it won't do any one thing well enough to be a compelling app, and so anybody would be willing to pay for it. Now, it's always a good idea to gather data in a systematic way, and for this you can use forms. There's several different ways to create free forms. I like these options here: Typeform, SurveyMonkey, or Google Forms. They work for dozens or hundreds or thousands of participants, and it'll tabulate all your data in very easy to read charts and graphs. And the last step in when you're conducting market research is always to keep a list of the people who have given you feedback. Make sure to say thank you. Make sure to give them periodic updates on your progress. Maybe when you're getting ready to launch your MVP, you can send them an email or get in touch with them, because a lot of these people, if you stay in touch and keep them engaged, are going to be your early adopters or the first people who pay to use your app. So you don't ever want to lose touch with them. They can also become early advocates and share the app amongst their groups of contacts, which can help expand your app's reach in the early stages after you launch it. So step number 2 is about the app scope and how to develop a minimum viable product. So like I said, the minimum viable product is commonly used because it has some real benefits. You focus on building the core app first, and not necessarily all the bells and the whistles. It gives you an early testing opportunity where you can launch the app and get feedback at a lower cost. And you can use the feedback and data that you've gathered to make changes to the app. It also gives you the ability to quickly validate if the market or the group of people who you plan on using this, if they have a need for this type of app. And if it's determined that it's not needed or that it needs to change drastically, you learn that information early on before you spent a ton of money on it. And so the minimum viable product approach is something like the graphic on the left. You don't want to build an app that is the black bar under functional, which basically is just covering the functional aspects of the app completely, but ignoring things like, is it reliable? Is it actually usable? And does it actually have an intelligent design, emotional design? Does it have a nice user interface? So the correct approach for an MVP is like the pyramid on the right, which has a small section of all of these aspects. So it is a little functional, a little reliable, a little usable, and has a little bit of thought put into the user interface and user experience. So just to differentiate those and provide a graphic to help you understand really what this approach is about. Another example is, and I really like this one, how not to build a minimum viable product on the top and how to build a minimum viable product on the bottom. So you can see on the top here, if you look at the end, you can obviously see the creator of this product wants to make a car. So they're going to start with one wheel, then two, and then a chassis, etc. They end up with a car. Well, if the car wasn't what was wanted, then they're not going to sell any. But the bottom approach is the correct approach. So they're going to start with something very simple, make it a little bit more complex, and kind of it evolves naturally until they end up with a car. So think about a minimum viable product in your app in this way, where you're going to start with the simplest thing, which in this case is a mode of transportation. You're going to build that as your app, and then you're going to have ideas and you're going to take feedback to develop those iterations going forward until you end up with that final version. The third section is about finding the right developer. It's really important that you spend enough time and do enough research data gathering from your research to pick a developer who's going to be the best fit for you. There's two main options here when you look at developers. There's US-based developers, which could be on the East Coast or on the West Coast or anywhere in the US, and there's offshore developers. So there's some pros and cons with each. The quality, now these are all based on my experience from working through probably 20 plus app builds and over 50 website builds. The quality can be identical in both of these scenarios. So that's not really a concern because developing a website or an app is essentially writing code, which is very mathematical based, and folks in India, China, or Eastern Europe can develop and write mathematical equations just as well as people in the US. The communication, however, is generally better based in the US. Both the time zone is more convenient for meetings and also the language barrier is not much of an issue. India has an advantage because most of the populace speaks English as a second language, but China and Eastern Europe you can really struggle to find a native English speaker or someone who can communicate in English. So that is a con. Time-wise, it's basically the same. When you get your price quotes, you'll see they'll probably be within 10 or 20% of each other based from different firms based around the world. The cost, however, is definitely higher in the US. And from my experience, you can expect to pay about 25% of the cost if you hire a development team offshore. So this is a huge pro for a lot of businesses who are looking to be cost effective with developing an app. It'll be much more expensive in the US, up to 4 times as expensive. And finally, you need someone who has a long-term commitment, because once you launch the app, I can guarantee there's going to be weeks of questions or things you need changed or bugs solved in the app that weren't found before. So you want to make sure that you're going to have a team or a person who's with you and has written in a contract with you that they'll provide 3 months of support or 6 months of support and what that will cost. In my experience, both US and offshore developers are happy to provide a long-term commitment, but that's definitely something to evaluate as you're selecting them. So at the end of the day, which is the better option for you? If you're more cost conscious, then I think the offshore option is the way a lot of businesses go, and it's a smart move because you're trying to maximize your profits here, and spending a lot of money on the app up front usually isn't viable. So they usually go for a cheaper option. As long as you're willing to handle the communication challenges that come with that, which honestly usually are not very bad. They're usually very minor, but you just have to be aware that you will have some delays in communication or some frustrations with the language barrier. The next step is really finding out what your app revenue model is going to be, so you can start figuring out how you're going to offset the cost of development. How are you going to make money with this app? So there's 6 main app revenue models. The first is in-app advertising. And so what this means is that your app is free to use, but they have banners. And the pro here is that your app can be free. You can charge 0 money for people using your app. But the major con here is that it can annoy users if the banners are overused. And when you create an app, you can decide where you want to place banners so they can be very inconspicuous or they can be larger and more frequent, and that's up to you. The second revenue model is in-app purchases. In-app purchases allow you to offer some of the app, or I'd say a majority of the app, for free. But when somebody wants to, say, get access to a new section of the app, or maybe your app has video content, if they want to get access to another section of videos to watch, you can just have a simple purchase button in the app. They can buy it and get access within 10 or 20 seconds. Now, the con with in-app purchases is that the app stores charge around 30% for any revenue made. So you'll lose 30% right off the top. The next revenue model is a subscription model. A pro here is that you get much more consistent cash flow. A lot of people will subscribe to something on a monthly or annual basis, and for better or for worse, kind of forget about it, even if they don't use the app. And this, for the app developers, generates a pretty consistent cash flow, which is really critical when you're running an app. However, it's not really a suitable model for all apps because it completely depends on what your app does and your business model overall. The freemium revenue model is a nice one because it has no barriers to a new customer using the app. And in a freemium model, you give away parts of the app, let's say 75% for free forever. Nobody ever has to pay to use those, but you have certain things locked away that have to be upgraded to, similar to an in-app purchase, but just slightly different. And the con here is that sometimes it can be difficult to determine which of those features should be given for free and which one should be put behind a paywall. And if you're in doubt about this, it's good to get feedback from your target market and just ask them, ask them candidly, which of these features would they be willing to pay for? And the idea here is that they get hooked using the app, and then they decide, oh, I'd really like that extra feature. That would really help make my life better somehow, and they would be willing to pay for it. And the next revenue type model is just a paid app. This is one that you've seen where you just have to buy it straight up for anywhere between 99 cents and $20 or more. Some apps cost more. The pro is that it's really predictable revenue. If somebody wants to use it, they have to buy it. You get that money up front. However, you get that money only once, and there's going to be strong competition. Like I said, there might be other apps that do something similar to yours that charge nothing up front. So your risk here is that you might lose a lot of your app users to those free versions or those free competitors. And the last type of revenue model are sponsorships. So sponsorships could be, you are partnering or sponsored by a larger company, and you're offering your app to their users for free generally, but they're paying you. So you're getting paid by your sponsor, by the larger company. Pretty much this can be useful for any type of business, but it does require a large user base. So, if you launch an app, but you're not getting many users using it, the company who's sponsoring you isn't going to be paying you much. So it all depends on how large of a user base you end up getting. And keep in mind, you don't have to just pick one revenue model. You can select 2 or maybe even 3 of these and combine them. And it just all depends on what your financial projections look like, what your target market is used to, what you think your target market would like the most. Step number 5 is successfully marketing your app. It's very important. You could develop a great app, you could have a great revenue model, it could have a great developer team, but if you're not marketing it successfully to your target demographic, you're not going to get the users you need, and it still might fail. So how do you market successfully to your target demographic? Well, step 1, you're going to identify who your target customers are. Do this by talking to people, interviewing them, and learning about their behaviors. From this, you can build buyer personas, which, look, you could just take a piece of paper and write down some general traits of different types of users. These are buyer personas. You can get more fancy and find some sort of a graphical template you could fill out online, but at the end of the day, you're just trying to understand your users and break them up into different groups, because that can be helpful to market to them. You're going to ask them things like, where are they looking for information? So if you're in an industry, let's just say you're in the construction industry, and your target customers, like people building new homes, well, where are people building new homes looking for information about that? So you're going to find out that from them, because this is where you will market your app. Segmenting your buyers into different personas and groups is helpful. If you determine that some of your target customers are females between the age of 30 and 40, and others tend to be males between the age of 50 and 60, they're two different markets, really. And when you talk to them in your marketing language, you're probably going to use different language, different images. So having separate personas and separate segments is very helpful. Step number 2, you need to determine your customers' needs and your wants. Again, by doing interviews, by doing research, and hopefully by relying on your past experience or career in a field, you're going to have some good insight into the needs and wants. By understanding the needs and wants, you can formulate your marketing message, the text, the images, and the videos that you use. And you can also, again, get feedback from potential customers when you're determining their needs and their wants. Just simply ask them, either in a survey or in a face-to-face conversation or a phone call. And third, you're going to build your strategy to reach your customers. Now, there's several different approaches. With apps, it's generally best, marketing is best done on social media, which is Facebook and Instagram. That's a really big one. Twitter, YouTube, if you have video content. There's also avenues of advertising like TikTok. So lots of different places to advertise online with social media. There's also paid ads, which are a pay-per-click model. So if you have a budget of $100 a month, you'll probably generate or somewhere around 500 clicks to your app, page on the store for that. And so you would have an ad and pay for those visitors. And finally, there would be traditional advertising, which would probably be newspaper, signage, you could think of billboards, anything in the traditional realm. So these are all marketing options for your app. Now, the next step is that you're going to build a prototype of some sort, and this usually starts with wireframes. So wireframes is a process you'll work with your developer to conceptualize how you want the app to flow between screens. And you can see in the example here that there's going to be a home screen that's just given, but from the home screen, every app's going to behave differently. And it's very important to think about the different steps that the user goes through to accomplish the goals for them using the app. So for example, Uber, right? Or Lyft, many of us have used these types of apps. The process is once you log in, you pick what kind of ride you want, you click a button to give the app your location, you have a countdown timer, etc. And so the app creators have thought through the wireframe. So you're going to do a similar process. Now keep in mind, you should always incorporate user feedback. So if a user says, I'd like to go from the home screen right into the ride sharing part of your app or right into the payment part of your app, then you should take that feedback and try to develop the app to satisfy their needs. And places to get user feedback, you can have surveys like talked about. There's a lot of good free survey platforms out there. You can have a link in your app to submit feedback or reporting problems. You can engage with customers on social media. So Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, you can create those pages for your app company or for your company if your app is part of a company existing or if you're creating a new company for the app. And you can solicit questions, you can pose questions and engage people with conversation on these platforms to get feedback about things like the wireframe and the user flow. You can also consider having contact information on a website you set up for the app, or places like Slack or Discord, which are two popular chatting platforms. So you can actually engage people there as well. And it's always a good idea to create the wireframes. I would say start creating them yourself and not leave that all up to a developer that you hire. And you can get started creating wireframes for free very simply. Here's 3 options that I really like: Just in Mind, Mockflow, and Adobe XD. These are all free to use for a limited amount of use, and that'll probably be fine for your needs. So get the feedback, figure out some wireframes, and if you present those to developers, it'll both go more smoothly developing your app and be less expensive because the developers won't have had to spend all of their own time creating wireframes and getting your approval. Step number 7 is launching your app. There's 2 different options here. You have to launch a beta app, and when you create your MVP, then you're typically going to launch what's called a beta launch, which just means you're iterating on the design rapidly. You're getting user feedback as quickly as possible. You're saving some time and money on the development, and you're doing a beta test. So there's two main types. The closed beta test is restricted to a certain group of people, generally people you know, and you can lock down the number of people who can use the app by giving out certain license keys or certain invites. So there's various processes to having a closed beta test. It's usually best when the software is usable, but it's not ready to be used by a wide audience just yet. Typically due to things like scaling issues. So you might have an app that works well if 10 people are using it or 100 people, but if 10,000 people start to use it, it actually gets really slow or has other problems. So that would be a scaling issue. And those are the types of issues that you'll probably know about early on. Your developers will probably say, hey, look, the infrastructure that we're going with here won't scale up to 10,000 plus users simultaneously. If this is the case, then doing a closed beta test will allow you to get feedback without worrying about those scaling issues. And again, your goal here is to get your testers to report bugs, suggest features, suggest improvements. And these are things that you'll note and hopefully start working on in the second version, or what you could call even the final version. And the other type of beta test is an open beta test. Here, if you had a group on Facebook or Twitter or just some group that you've been talking to, you could post news that anybody can go download the app for free and try it out. This would be an open beta test because you don't know who will actually try it out. They won't be people you know directly. It serves the purpose of demonstrating the product to your potential customers and taking and testing among a wide user base. And it's very important also if you're developing an Android and an iOS app at the same time, that you get enough people using both platforms to test it thoroughly, because you might find that there's issues on one platform and not another. And it's very hard to create an app that has no issues. That's basically impossible. So your beta test here is going to be your channel for resolving issues before you plan on spending a lot of marketing money and actually find those issues later when you have a greater potential of loss. So the next step is now promoting your app to the general public. So your beta test is done. Again, you might beta test for a couple of weeks up to a couple of months. It all depends on what your goals are, how quickly you need the app to launch, and when you need to start monetizing it. So generally speaking, if you're creating an app, you're going to want to have a website for this app, unless the app is part of your existing business that already has its own website. So you can decide on that. Having a website for your app, though, increases its legitimacy. When you look at apps on an app store, there's a link to the website. And so if that website is a nice looking website that talks about the app and looks like it was professionally made, this gives your app more legitimacy and higher perceived value than an app without a website. So building a website is a good place to promote your app. Also using social media. So just having a presence on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and maybe YouTube, if that makes sense for you, is going to be a free way to allow people to find your app. You can create your accounts and you can follow people in your target industry who you already know because you did the market research and you have those buyer personas. You can make posts that are interesting but not overly promotional. So tips and tricks or news about your target market, the things they find interesting. And you can also, when you have a post that you would like, that you think is going to be really relevant, you can boost it, which puts a little bit of money to make more people see a certain post, which it can increase your social media following rather quickly. The next aspect of the app promotion is just public relations. So this comes down to, at the beginning, your networking. So if you're developing an app in a certain industry, maybe you've worked in that industry in your career, so you know influencers, you know other people in the industry, networking with them, telling them about the app, getting them excited. You can consider writing a press release that could go out in some sort of an industry publication that would be relevant in your industry. People have launched, had a launch party for their app and invited people. Now these parties were in person, and then during the pandemic, a lot of them went virtual, and now they're usually in person again, these kind of app launch parties. You can decide, you can have a virtual event, that's fine. You should try to conduct interviews with local publications like newspapers and even bloggers in your space. in your industry, and offer to write blog posts on other people's blogs, again, with the idea of, putting in that you have an app that solves a problem, putting that in the blog post somewhere. And finally, never underestimate the importance of using an endorsement from somebody like a celebrity or an influencer. If you have people like this in a network that you've developed, then going to them first is useful. Sometimes they will be happy to promote your app for free. Other times they'll want to be compensated, but that's just a conversation and negotiation you can have with them. It can be a very powerful promotional tool, having an endorsement. And you should think about, if you don't have anybody in your network that comes to mind, research who's an influencer on Twitter or Instagram, communicating with them, and seeing if they'll promote your app on their social media channels. And one thing to be cautious of is that it's not going to do you much good to find an influencer who doesn't have a following that's your target market. So, if you go down that road, you'll spend time and maybe money working with an influencer only to have people click on, your app download page, but they're not the kind of people who would be using your app. So you lose their interest, and essentially you've wasted that time and the money. So if you promote your app, I think a combination of all four of these, and depending on your time and your strengths at marketing, you might choose to focus on one of these over another, but they're all valuable ways to promote your app. And that concludes the formal part of the presentation. I'll be happy to take your questions now. And like I said, if there's any questions I can't get to today, then feel free to reach out to me directly, and we can set up a one-on-one meeting to talk about that more.
Thanks, Cameron. We do have one question in the Q&A right now. Any recommendations on tools to identify and target testing cohort groups, B2C, Facebook?
Yeah, so when you're talking about testing cohort groups, generally, if you're going to be doing a test, you're going to maybe have several different markets in mind. And so a cohort group would be each one of those different types of markets. So the question was, is there a platform or tool out there specifically designed for getting feedback from different cohorts? Not in my experience, but any of the survey tools that I listed can be easily adapted to that purpose. So for example, if you have 3 different groups, 3 different cohorts you're thinking of targeting and that you want to get data from, you could create a Google form for group A, group B, and group C, and you could customize that form with whatever questions or information you want to provide to that cohort and what data you want to get back, and then just send out the links to the relevant surveys to each different cohort. I think that's probably the easiest way to organize something like that, because I have never heard of a tool that will simplify it any more than that.
We've had Parker's clarified what he was looking for. He wanted to know if there was a better platform for being able to identify cohorts, not test cohorts.
So if you're not sure, if you're not sure who your target cohorts are, and I think cohorts here is synonymous with kind of your buyer personas, or who are those major buyers of your app potentially. It just comes down to market research, and I think using your own knowledge of your industry. So, depending on your industry, how you would go about doing that research varies a lot, but there are both public sources of data, newspaper articles, publications, and also stuff like census data and government data that's reported on every year, that both can be very useful in building up those personas and identifying those cohorts. There's also research data done that you can pay for from private companies like Gardner and Forrester are 2 of the big ones, but those cost money. So those are 3 different ways to start doing that research. Like I said, I do a lot of that for clients. And so if you'd like to get in touch with me, I might be able to provide some more detailed guidance once I know more about your app.
Great. Do you recommend building an application with cross-platform frameworks such as Flutter?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned early on, the 2 main platforms, iOS and Android, both have strengths and weaknesses. A cross-platform development solution like Flutter, and there's many others, they attempt to let your developer write one app, and it'll create 2 different versions that'll work for both app stores. The idea is that you write one code base and it works perfectly in both app stores. The reality is that never works perfectly. I've talked to a lot of developers about this, and the consensus is they don't really like doing it generally. because they know from experience how many problems will occur. So from my experience, most recently, it's not advised to use a cross-platform thing like Flutter. Now, you might find a developer, and once they hear about your app and they know what it needs to do, will say, okay, this will work fine with something like Flutter. But in most cases, you'll run into problems, and it's advisable to actually develop 2 separate apps, one for each app store.
What do you think about creating a web-based app over an Android/iOS store app as a means to keep costs down?
So that's a good thought. A web-based app in this sense generally means you will create a website and the app will still be downloadable from the store, but it'll just pull in the website and kind of put it in a frame of an app. This is a viable option in a lot of cases, as long as the app is not doing anything too complicated. For example, you can't do a lot of things on a website with website code that you could do in an app, like GPS and tracking stuff comes to mind. An app is much better at those types of things than a website will be, and much faster and more reliable. So I think that's a viable option if you keep it really simple. If it's informational only, maybe it has a video that you play, maybe there's a contact form. Yes, that kind of app could work just as a simple website wrapped in an app kind of wrapper. But for more complicated things and for most things, an app, a dedicated app is the way to go.
Can you provide resources for best DIY app builders?
Well, there's no real shortcut or DIY way to build an app, I would say. App developers who are good have been doing it for 5 to 6 years. And so there's not really a shortcut to get to that type of level of building an app. So yeah, I mean, if your background is already in development, there might be some recommendations I could make, but I haven't researched DIY resources recently. And also it totally depends on what your level of experience already is, what I'd recommend. So that would be good to talk to me about offline, and maybe you could give me some more of those details and I could provide some more recommendations for you.
Okay. I know prices vary for a simpler MVP, but what dollar range have you seen to develop, not including marketing?
Yeah, so it's a tricky question to answer because depending on the features that your app's going to have, it varies a lot, and it could 2x or 3x the cost, depending on the features you need. So let's say, though, you're building a very simple app. In the US, having a developer build you an app is probably not going to be any cheaper than around $5,000 for quite a simple app, with a few screens, with a few functions. Now, like I said, offshore, those prices are a lot cheaper. So you could expect to spend $1,000 to $1,500 if you went with a developer in India for that, again, very simple app. Prices only go up from there. And so for a lot of apps I've worked on for businesses, they've come in around $10,000 to $15,000 for a US based developer. So yeah, that's a range for kind of the low end. And of course, they can get much more expensive based on what you need.
Thoughts on Bubble.io?
I'm not familiar with Bubble.io actually, so I'll have to skip on that one, but I'll do some research and learn about it.
Okay. How can you go about getting financing for building an app?
That would be wonderful. There are sometimes city, county, state, and federal grants and things like loans available. Your local SBDC office and local SBDC advisor is going to have the best information for your area on grant opportunities. There's also financing from banks, of course, and SBDC advisors who have experience with bank loans could help you. Maybe a loan's a viable option. There's other ways of funding apps would be something like Kickstarter or crowdfunding, which a lot of apps have been developed that way. And if you have a large market that's clamoring for your app, you could put it on Kickstarter and say, okay, everybody can come and fund it now. And there's also the route of friends and family funding, right? Actually having investors come in. First round of friends and family is generally what that's called. And beyond that would be angel investing, and proposing your app to a group of angel investors. So there's lots of different ways of funding. If you're interested in grants or loans, I'd encourage you to reach out to your local SBDC office. If you'd like information on the angel funding, I'd be happy to talk to you because I've helped coach several app developers, businesses with apps through that process.
What would you consider as a simple app?
Well, a simple app is like a simple website. It would basically be providing information about a business or about a service or a product, but not necessarily selling that product online. So a simple app would be maybe just a one-screen app. Then as you scroll down, it would have images and pictures of a business and maybe a contact form. And that would be appropriate maybe if you were a consultant or a CPA providing tax advice. Your app is mainly to get people to learn about your business, and then they contact you. So that's basically the simplest type of app or website. There would be no aspect of taking payments. There would be no aspect of a user login where they would upload documents or anything. That would all be a more complex app.
Last question. I'm not sure that this is one that you can give specific answer to, or you might need to talk to this person offline, but is there any general, I had an app developed, but unfortunately it was done by an online agency developing apps, and they tried to take money for really nothing. I have the beta, but I'm worried that I don't know how to test if it's good and doesn't have any scams. Is there any general advice that you can give?
Well, yeah, that is a bit of a complicated question. I think when you ask if it has any scams, you might mean, does it have any viruses or code in it that is malicious code? There's no real way that I know of for testing for like malicious code written in an app, other than when you upload them to the App Store, whether it's Android or iOS for approval, they run it through a really rigorous process where they have already identified common code that is malicious. And if you have it in your app, they'll reject it and they'll tell you it's been rejected. So if in doubt, you could upload it to the store for their approval. And if it passes their approval, likely there's no malicious code. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it would probably be to hire a different development team and ask them to look at it through, tools that they would have available. But from your point of view, I think all you could do would be to upload it to one of those app stores.
Okay. Well, thanks, Cameron. That is the last question that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and close out the webinar. Thank you all for attending today. I did post an evaluation in the poll window. If you could take the time to fill out the evaluation, we'd really appreciate it. It helps us to improve our the sessions that we offer. You'll receive an email with a link to the recording and slides for today's session. If you'd like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded sessions that we've already done, you can visit the virginiasbdc.org/training site to access those presentations. And you heard Cameron mention he's available for consulting as are other advisors in our network. You can sign up for a free and confidential advising session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or by going to our website. So thank you everyone for attending today.
Thanks everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.